The Eclipse-class Super Star Destroyer was the most powerful warship the Galactic Empire ever built. 17,500 meters from bow to stern. That figure comes directly from West End Games product WEG 40071, the Dark Empire Sourcebook, written by Michael Allen Horne, published June 1993. The ship's hull was jet black durasteel and quadranium alloy. Crew 707,263, plus 4,175 dedicated gunners. Complement 150,000 stormtroopers, 600 TIE Interceptors organized into 50 squadrons, 96 TIE bombers, 100 AT-AT walkers, 5 prefabricated garrison bases. Armament 550 heavy laser cannons, 500 turbolasers, 75 ion cannons, tractor beam projectors, and gravity well projectors, the same interdictor technology that could drag ships out of hyperspace mid-jump. Running the full length of its keel was an axial superlaser, consumables for 10 years. The ship was, by mass, the largest Super Star Destroyer ever built, and was explicitly designed to be self-sufficient. There's a contradiction buried here before you even reach the hyperdrive. The original Dark Empire comic series described the Eclipse as 10 miles from stem to stern. 10 miles is approximately 16 kilometers. The Dark Empire Sourcebook published alongside it gives 17,500 meters, 17.5 kilometers. Wookieepedia's own article documents the discrepancy openly, noting that the sourcebook author apparently added 1.5 kilometers to account for personalization and customization of Palpatine's specific ship versus the standard class design. That explanation isn't in any primary source. It's a reconciliation offered after the fact. The Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia lists 17.5 kilometers for the Eclipse itself, then lists 16 kilometers in the separate Star Destroyer entry, which Wookieepedia flags as a probable typo. The ship had been in print for less than 2 years, and its own specifications couldn't agree on its length. But the Hyperdrive entry is the one that doesn't recover. The Hyperdrive class system operates on an inverse scale. Lower numbers mean faster drives. Class 1 reaches any destination in the base travel time. Class 2 takes twice as long to cover the same route. The Millennium Falcon's famous Class 0.5 drive covers the distance in half the time a Class 1 needs. By the end of the Clone Wars, Legends canon established that most military vessels ran Class 2 or better. The Dark Empire Sourcebook lists the Eclipse's hyperdrive as multiplier times 2, Class 2 primary, Class 6 backup. Standard Rebel starfighters flew Class 1. The X-Wing's Class 1 hyperdrive is confirmed in the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels as enabling independent long-range operations. The RZ-1 A-Wing also ran Class 1. An X-Wing is 12.5 meters long. It carries one pilot and an astromech droid. It could reach any point in the galaxy in half the time Palpatine's 17,500-meter, 707,263 crew flagship required. Class 1 is twice as fast as Class 2. That's the canonical math, confirmed in multiple WEG publications and the Wookieepedia Hyperdrive article. Every Rebel starfighter pilot in standard Alliance hardware outpaced the Emperor's personal warship to any hyperspace destination, routinely, by a factor of 2. The scope widens immediately. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer also runs a Class 2 hyperdrive. Wookieepedia's both canon and Legends articles confirm this identically. Every major capital ship in Kuat Drive Yard's production line shared the same hyperdrive standard that the Alliance's smallest combat platforms could surpass. This isn't a quirk specific to the Eclipse. It's the doctrine, written into every Star Destroyer keel plate across 1,100 meters of warship. Vader's Executor entered the expanded universe as a vessel so large it made an Imperial-class Star Destroyer look like an escort craft. Establishing its actual dimensions took 23 years of productive confusion. The error chain starts in 1980. Promotional material for The Empire Strikes Back described the Executor as larger and stronger than 5 ordinary Star Destroyers. Stronger. Not 5 times longer, 5 times more powerful. When West End Games published the Imperial Sourcebook, WEG 40006, October 1989, written by Greg Gordon, that distinction disappeared. The text ran the multiplication directly. 1.6 kilometers times 5, printed as over 8 kilometer length. The book included a scale diagram that had compressed the Executor's aft section to fit the proportion, quietly eliminating 4 of the ship's actual 13 engine banks from the illustration. 9 engines appeared where 13 should have been. 8 kilometers became the figure. The 1996 Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels repeated it. Gaming supplements cited it. Each new citation added apparent authority. Curtis Saxton, publishing through the Star Wars Technical Commentaries at theforce.net, identified how to resolve it. Kuat Drive Yards constructed all its Star Destroyer classes with command towers built to consistent specifications, same dimensions, regardless of hull length. Using the tower as a fixed measurement reference and analyzing film footage frame by frame, Saxton calculated the Executor at between 17.4 and 17.8 kilometers. In 1998, Lucasfilm employee David West Reynolds physically measured the original Executor model in the Lucasfilm archives, at Saxton's request, and returned figures consistent with that range. James Luceno's Inside the Worlds of Star Wars trilogy, published in 2002, corrected the printed record explicitly. The Executor was nearly a dozen times the length of a Star Destroyer. Jason Fry's Essential Guide to Warfare, 2012, stated 19 kilometers as the Legends standard. That figure now heads the Executor's Wookieepedia article. The 1989 Imperial Sourcebook figure was never officially retracted. West End Games issued no correction statement. The transition from 8 to 19 kilometers was embedded silently into newer publications, as though the earlier number had never been established. Wookieepedia's own talk pages for the Superclass Star Destroyer article document the community working through this. Imperial reports call the Executor an 8-kilometer Superclass Star Destroyer. The Executor is a 19-kilometer Executor-class Star Dreadnought. 2 designations, 2 lengths, 1 ship. Anyone reading sources across different publication eras gets figures ranging from 8 kilometers to approximately 20, with no official acknowledgement that any earlier source was wrong. The figure was a misread from 1980 that took until 2012 to fully displace in print, and it displaced silently. The Altor-class supply ship is 4,600 meters long, nearly 3 times the length of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. 6 external spheroidal fuel containers. At least 4 articulated refueling arms capable of servicing 2 capital ship-scale vessels simultaneously. Stern dry dock complexes large enough to accommodate frigate-sized vessels for repairs. 7 primary thrusters, each encircled by 8 auxiliary engines. 56 auxiliary drives in total. The ship was produced by the Galactic Empire and appears in the 2012 Legends reference work Essential Guide to Warfare, written by Jason Fry. Its Latin name, Altor, translates to nourisher. Wookieepedia's canonical article on the Altor class lists all of this. What it does not list is a Hyperdrive class rating. The propulsion section documents every thruster configuration in detail and stops there. No Hyperdrive classification appears in the article. Fan-produced RPG supplements and YouTube breakdowns suggest a Class 1.8, but that number doesn't trace to any West End Games sourcebook or Lucasfilm-authorized publication. It's an inference in unofficial material, not a canonical specification. The operational consequence is direct. A vessel whose assigned function is to refuel a hyperspace-capable fleet must itself travel through hyperspace to perform that function. The fleet jumps. If the Altor has no confirmed hyperdrive, or runs a drive inferior to the vessels it supplies, it can't follow. The ship exists to solve the fleet's logistics problem, and may canonically lack the means to keep pace with the problem it's solving. This extends to a broader lore absence. Fuel exists in the Star Wars universe. Hypermatter is confirmed as the substance that powers both hyperdrives and capital ship reactors. The Death Star's primary reactor annihilated hypermatter fuel to generate its output, and that output is documented in technical references. But consumption rates, operational range limits, and replenishment intervals for Imperial fleet vessels were never codified anywhere in the Legends sourcebook line. The fleet burns through something at massive scale. The Altor was built to replace it. Neither the ship's hyperdrive nor the fleet's fuel requirements appear in the canonical record as confirmed specifications. The Altor was built to answer a question the lore barely admits to asking, with its most critical operational attribute left unspecified. The Secutor-class Star Destroyer is 2,200 meters long, 600 meters longer than an Imperial I-class, and carries 40,000 officers, pilots, and enlisted crew, plus 14,000 troops, with 2 years of consumables. 2 ventral hangar apertures define its silhouette. Wookieepedia's Legends entry describes the Secutor as serving primarily as a carrier. The Stardust Archives Project wiki calls it the closest the Empire strayed to a dedicated carrier. The classification creates the problem. A 2.2-kilometer hull, bearing the Star Destroyer designation, was built primarily to launch fighters, yet its fighter complement doesn't dominate the internal layout the way a carrier-first design would demand. Official documentation simultaneously calls it a carrier and a battlecruiser, 2 roles with fundamentally different design priorities in the same hull. If carrier operations are primary, hangar volume should dominate internal space, and armament should be secondary. If destroyer combat is primary, the inverse applies. The Secutor carries enough weapons to operate as a capital warship, and enough hangar capacity to function as a fleet carrier, without being fully committed to either. The designation reinforces this. Star Destroyer originated with a specific type of warship built around firepower and multi-role destroyer operations. Applying it to a carrier primary vessel means the classification and the operational purpose describe different ship concepts. The Secutor sits inside a naming system designed for a vessel type it doesn't fully represent, which means any tactical planner reading its designation gets an incomplete picture of what the ship actually does. The Aggressor-class destroyer is approximately ISD-sized, constructed around a weapon combination the Imperial fleet hadn't previously fielded. Its forward-mounted fire-linked battery pairs an ion pulse cannon with a plasma cannon. The ion discharge strips shields. The plasma shot hits the unprotected hull immediately after. Wookieepedia's entry on the Aggressor class confirms the weapon architecture and the ship's comparative size to an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. It also notes that despite heavy armor, the Aggressor-class ships were cumbersome in battle and required protection from faster capital ships and their starfighters. That's where the operational concept falls apart. The firelink requires the aggressor to align its forward section with the target to execute the weapon sequence. A ship described as cumbersome in fleet engagements struggles to achieve and maintain that bow-on alignment without external support. The heavy armor compensates for a maneuverability problem the design created. A capital warship that requires escort from smaller vessels it was built to fight alongside isn't delivering on the threat its spec sheet describes. Wookieepedia also documents that aggressor crews were known to employ self-destruct as a tactical option in losing engagements, suggesting the ship was vulnerable enough in practice that controlled destruction became operationally relevant. The design specification and the battlefield reality produced 2 different ships. The Carrack-class light cruiser is 350 meters long, with a crew of between 1,007 and 1,092 personnel. Sources disagree on the exact number, and 85 designated gunners. No hangar bay. 4 TIE fighters ride external hull racks. Demorian Manufacturing Corporation built it as a budget alternative. Wookieepedia's Legends article states this plainly: a cheap replacement for expensive capital ships. The armament contradicts the framing. 10 heavy turbolasers. Under West End Games' D6 system rules, each heavy turbolaser requires 3 dedicated crew to operate. 10 emplacements at 3 gunners each equals 30 personnel minimum for the primary battery alone, out of a total gunner complement of 85. The remaining 55 cover everything else: point defense, ion cannons, secondary weapons, on a 350-meter hull with just over 1,000 people aboard. Wookieepedia's Legends article acknowledges the design philosophy directly. The Carrack wasn't designed to operate as ships of the line, despite being capable of trading fire with larger adversaries. The intention was to strip out the hangar, reduce troop capacity to 142, cut cargo to 3,500 metric tons, and concentrate the freed tonnage into armament. The design is intentional. The math of actually crewing those weapons, at the numbers published in the same official sources, has never been reconciled. Running 10 heavy turbolasers with 85 total gunners on a 350-meter hull leaves almost nothing in reserve for damage control, engineering, or navigation under sustained fire. The Carrack punches above its weight class on paper. The spec sheet doesn't explain how the crew makes that happen. The pattern holds fleet-wide. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer carries between 37,085 and 47,060 crew, depending on the source. Wookieepedia's canon article settles on approximately 37,000. The Legends breakdown runs: 9,235 officers, 27,850 enlisted personnel, plus a stormtrooper complement of 9,700. But different publications count the stormtroopers toward the total differently, shifting the combined figure across a range of nearly 10,000 personnel for the same class of warship. At the Empire's canonical peak of more than 25,000 active Imperial-class Star Destroyers, the difference between a 37,000 crew figure and a 47,000 crew figure represents a discrepancy of over 250 million people at the fleet level. The lore has never resolved which figure is correct. Early production blueprints for the ISD, from concept art that predated the final design, listed the ship at 468 meters. The 1,600-meter canonical length is what reached film. Those blueprints were official production materials, not fan estimates, documenting an intermediate design state before the final scale was established, then circulating in reference publications before the revision was complete. The Victory-class Star Destroyer, as the Imperial-class predecessor, reportedly ran a faster hyperdrive, enabling rapid response deployment against uprisings across Imperial territory. The Imperial class that replaced it standardized to Class 2, slower strategic mobility in the successor design. No canonical source explains the logic of that transition as deliberate doctrine. It may reflect a considered doctrinal shift towards sustained combat endurance over rapid deployment. It may also reflect 2 different WEG authors, working at different points in the 1987 to 1998 publication run, assigning speeds to predecessor and successor without coordinating the figures. West End Games published dozens of sourcebooks across 11 years, authored by different writers drawing from different prior references, without a centralized continuity document governing which numbers were authoritative. The company declared bankruptcy in July 1998. By the time the license moved to Wizards of the Coast, the contradictions were embedded throughout the Legends canon, not as failures, but as evidence of a universe built by committee over time, where no single editorial process could hold all of it simultaneously. The closing contradiction runs directly back to the Eclipse. The Dark Empire Sourcebook states the axial superlaser fires at approximately 2/3 the power of one of the Death Star superlaser's component beams. Not 2/3 of the Death Star's total weapon output, 2/3 of one component beam. The Death Star's weapon was composite, 8 tributary beams combining into a single discharge. Per that architecture, each component contributes roughly 1/8 of the weapon's total yield. 2/3 of 1/8 is a small fraction of full planetary destruction output. The in-story evidence matches the limited reading. In Dark Empire, the Eclipse's super laser cracks planetary surfaces, destroys capital ships, and sears entire continents. It does not destroy worlds. The sourcebook confirms the weapon was designed to penetrate planetary shields and vaporize cities. The Eclipse is devastating. It isn't a planet killer. Wookieepedia's own article on the Eclipse class documents the problem that follows from this. The behind-the-scenes section notes that the superlaser is simultaneously described as capable of overpowering any planetary shield and equal to 2/3 of a single Death Star component beam, and that some technical analyses suggest the stated output might exceed the yield threshold necessary to destroy a planet anyway, depending on how the Death Star's component fractions are interpreted. The Wookieepedia article presents 3 reconciling positions and settles none of them. Position 1. 2/3 of a component beam represents genuinely subplanetary output, consistent with the in-story behavior. The Eclipse cracks surfaces. The Death Star obliterates worlds. The stated yield matches the observed effect. Position 2. The 2/3 figure refers to proportional power magnitude rather than absolute yield, placing the Eclipse below full Death Star output, but in a zone where the exact planetary destruction threshold becomes ambiguous. Position 3. The destructive mechanism of a hypermatter-fueled superlaser is insufficiently defined in canonical sources to permit direct yield comparison at all, making the math incoherent regardless of which fractions are applied. The Death Star's primary reactor annihilated hypermatter fuel to generate its discharge, and a documented peak output figure exists for that reactor in the technical literature. No equivalent figure exists for the Eclipse's reactor. Without a confirmed yield for a single Death Star component beam, calculated separately from the total weapon, the 2/3 comparison is constructed on an undefined reference point. 2 weapons, one stated in relative terms, the relative term undefined in absolute units. No Lucasfilm statement addressed this before the 2014 canon reset moved the Eclipse entirely into Legends. No future publication will resolve it. Wookieepedia's article has carried all 3 interpretations simultaneously for years. If you have a definitive position on what 2/3 of one Death Star component beam means in absolute yield terms, leave it in the comments. The lore has been running this argument since 1993 and hasn't landed. Subscribe for more dives into the ships, numbers, and contradictions that make this universe worth arguing about.